Hello, welcome to Get Your Mind On. I'm Lori Stohs. Well, this is our fourth in our series of understanding the strengths dimensions. As we've kind of talked about, there's four different dimensions: executing, influencing, relationship building, and thinking. And today we're going to talk about that thinking category. And this again links back to the Gallup Strengths Finder. So if you haven't taken it, it's kind of good to get your arms around something. But this information will really help you just think in general about those thinking patterns that exist in individuals. So first, when you think about the thinking, the whole thinking, those thinking patterns are really those that are, there's different ways to think. I remember I had a CEO who asked me, he goes, "Lori, I need a really good thinker." So my first question is, what kind of thinker do you need? And he's like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, there's so many different ways of thinking. There's people who are visionary thinkers that can see down the way, that are kind of forecasting where we're heading or what it's going to look like. There's people who are analytical thinkers who are really more about the proof and the data and more detail-oriented understanding of the analysis of information. There's those people who are about the past. They're kind of the ones that are the backdrop about what has happened, why has it happened, what's worked, what hasn't worked, before we decide how we need to move forward. There's those people who are really strategic in terms of they're the ones thinking about what are the different ways to get to the outcome. They see when we have a problem, they look at 3 or 4 different ways. It's in their head. They see it clearly. They know when the the train's going to end, or when the plane's going to crash. They can see that's not the right way to go. We need to go this way or that way, which is a very different way of thinking. There's so many different ways of thinking. There's those people who are the ideators. They're the ones that come up, what about this? What about this? What about that? They're the creative ones, right? They're always in the sky thinking about different things. Lots of ideas, and they'll tell you they're not all good, but they sure have a lot of good ideas. So there's all different kinds of thinking. And I think what it's important to think about for ourselves is, what is our style of thinking? Because you may be one of those different ways of thinking, and understanding who's surrounding you to understand what are the different ways to think. So some of us really do have that processing piece. Sometimes we just need some time. Sometimes we're fast, right? So I think you need to understand, how do you go through thinking patterns for yourself and what's required for your work. For those of us who don't have thinking, some of us may be executors, and we don't like sitting in the room when it comes to those big dreams and the strategy. Just tell me what I need to do and I'll just take care of it. Those of you who might be more executing and may not have as much thinking, you don't really need to understand the whole context of everything. And you don't need to understand, you just want to understand, can we make it happen? So that's important to remember. Some of you may have more of that influencing talent, so you don't need to have the research. Like, I'm one that I don't love sitting down and digging into the research and the data analysis. I have the hypothesis, and I like to have it proven. And I have great partners who are great data analysis people, and they'll find all of those discoveries that I might not have thought about, but I like to then take that information and teach it and share it and help organizations grow around it and say, here's what you can do to use it. That's the influencing side. So really understanding, if you're not that, how do you partner with somebody, or how do you know what it could be from that thinking pattern? The other thing then to think about is, if you're managing thinkers, I think you really also have to think about what do you need. Going back to my little story before about the CEO, you really need to understand what you're looking for, because I think there's such variation in that big picture thinking to the data thinking, that when we're not really clarifying that in the role that we need, sometimes we get really disappointed, because there's a huge gap between visionary and analytical. And most people, many people can't think both ways because of just the way the brain thinks or the way their wiring is. So being aware of what we need when we're managing others. The other thing is thinking about those different pieces of thinking, and in terms of, some people may be great at the thought, but we might expect them to execute, and that's not who they are. So they have great ideas, but they're not executing, and sometimes you have the expectation that they can do both. Some people can, but some people can't. So really, when we're managing people, understanding, number 1, what we need, and number 2, what is their way of getting there. So for positive charge this week, number 1, think about, what is your style of thinking? Are you big picture thinking? Are you an analytical thinking, or is it really just not something that you need a lot of? Secondly is, if you don't have it and you need to use it, where do you tap into it? And 3, if you're managing those thinkers, how do you become aware of what you need and what your team has? You know, some of those best ideas and the best thinking about where we're heading in the future and the creativity comes from those people who are great thinkers, or those who really solidify the analysis of maybe an idea of where we're heading. So really thinking is something that's critical that we need. It's just understanding who you are, what you need in role, and how you can really operate day to day with those thinking patterns. Thanks for joining us today, and remember to get your mind on.